On a bright summer morning in London, three American college students, Jake Thompson, Mike Sullivan, and Chris Reynolds, strolled through the bustling streets near Buckingham Palace. The trio, all 21 years old and celebrating their graduation from Ohio State University, were on their first ever international trip. It was their fifth day in London, and they had already visited most of the famous tourist spots. Big Ben, London Eye, Tower Bridge, they had seen it all. But what fascinated them most were the royal guards with their distinctive red uniforms and tall bearskin hats. Each day, they would return to watch these guards, taking countless selfies and trying to make them laugh or move. "These guys are like statues," Jake had commented on their first day, waving his hand in front of a guard's face. The guard, as expected, remained motionless, staring straight ahead with unwavering discipline. The three friends had started their morning with a heavy English breakfast at their hostel, followed by several rounds of beer at a nearby pub. The alcohol, combined with their growing familiarity with the city, made them feel invincible. They had noticed that the guards were just young men like themselves, probably not much older than they were. "You know what would be epic?" Mike said, his words slightly slurred as they watched a guard standing alone at his post. "We should do something that no other tourist has ever done before." Chris, usually the voice of reason in the group, was too influenced by alcohol to think clearly. "What do you have in mind?" he asked, his judgment clouded by the morning's drinks. Jake reached into his backpack and pulled out some zip ties. He had bought them earlier in the week to secure their broken suitcase. A mischievous grin spread across his face as he showed them to his friends. "No way, dude." Mike's eyes widened with excitement. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" The three friends huddled together, giggling like schoolchildren as they formed their plan. They failed to notice the security cameras watching their every move, or the fact that each guard was equipped with modern communication devices beneath their traditional uniforms. They watched the lone guard for several minutes, studying his position near a decorative pole. The guard stood perfectly still, maintaining his professional composure despite the growing heat of the day. His youth was evident in his face. He couldn't have been older than 23. "Look, there's hardly anyone around," Jake whispered. "It's now or never." The three friends approached the guard, pretending to pose for photos like regular tourists. Mike had his phone out, recording what they thought would be an epic viral video. Chris stood lookout, though his attention was more focused on suppressing his nervous laughter than actually watching for authority figures. In a swift motion that surprised even themselves, Jake and Mike moved behind the guard. Before anyone could react, they had secured his arms to the pole with the zip ties. The guard, trained to maintain his composure, remained still, but his eyes flickered briefly with a mix of shock and anger. "This is going to break the internet," Mike exclaimed, filming the entire scene while Chris took photos. The tourists around them had mixed reactions. Some gasped in horror, others quickly walked away, while a few even took out their phones to record the incident. The three friends were oblivious to the disapproving looks and muttered criticisms from passersby. What they didn't know was that the moment they restricted the guard's movement, a silent alarm had been triggered. The guard's earpiece had picked up the commotion, and his lack of response to a standard check had already alerted his superiors. The three friends continued laughing and taking photos, completely unaware of the approaching response team. They were too busy planning how they would edit the video and which social media platforms they would post it on first. "This is going to make us famous," Jake declared, still giggling at their prank. Little did they know that fame would indeed come their way, but not in the manner they had hoped for. As they celebrated their supposed victory, the synchronized sound of marching boots was already echoing in the distance. Their moment of foolish triumph was about to turn into one of the biggest mistakes of their lives. The morning sun continued to shine brightly over London, its warm rays illuminating the scene of what would soon become an international incident. In just 5 minutes, these three young Americans would learn a harsh lesson about respecting foreign customs and military personnel. The sound came first, the rhythmic thump of heavy boots striking the pavement in perfect unison. Jake, Mike, and Chris were still laughing at their brilliant prank when the first row of Queen's Guard rounded the corner, their red uniforms blazing in the morning sun. "Dude, are those more guards coming?" Chris's voice trembled as he spotted them. The smile vanished from his face as he counted not one or two, but an entire squad approaching with deadly precision. The bound guard maintained his stoic expression, but a slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He knew exactly what was coming. The tourists who had gathered to watch the prank quickly backed away, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Stop filming, Mike," Jake whispered, finally realizing they might have crossed a serious line. But Mike's hands were shaking so badly that he dropped his phone, the screen cracking on the pavement. The approaching squad was led by a tall, stern-faced sergeant whose chest was decorated with military medals. Unlike the ceremonial stance of regular guards, these men moved with obvious purpose. Their rifles, while typically just for show, were now held in a manner that commanded immediate respect. "Oh God! Oh God!" Chris muttered, backing away slowly. "We need to run." But before any of them could move, the squad had surrounded them in a perfect formation. The surgeon's voice cut through the morning air like a knife. "Stand exactly where you are. Do not move." Two guards immediately moved to free their colleague from the zip ties, while others maintained a tight perimeter around the three Americans. The freed guard rolled his shoulders once, then assumed his position within the squad, his training kicking in despite the ordeal. "Your passports," the sergeant demanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Now." With trembling hands, the three friends fumbled through their pockets. The alcohol's effects had suddenly vanished, replaced by cold, stark fear. "Sir, we were just having some fun," Mike attempted to explain, his voice cracking. "It was just a prank for social media." "Silence," the sergeant's command echoed across the courtyard. "Do you have any idea of the seriousness of your actions? These are not toy soldiers. This is not a tourist attraction. These are active-duty military personnel serving the crown." By now, a large crowd had gathered, many recording the scene on their phones. The three Americans stood in shame as the sergeant continued his dressing down. "You have assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces. You have interfered with a soldier on active duty. You have compromised the security of a royal installation." Each statement hit them like a physical blow. Two police cars arrived with their lights flashing, responding to the alert from the Queen's Guard. Metropolitan police officers quickly took charge of the situation, reading the three their rights as they were handcuffed. "Please, we're sorry," Jake pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "We didn't think." "That's precisely the problem," one of the police officers interrupted. "You didn't think. And now you'll have plenty of time to think about it at the station." The crowd watched in silence as the three Americans were led to the police cars. Their backpacks were confiscated as evidence, and their phones were sealed in evidence bags. The gravity of their situation was finally sinking in. As they were being placed in the police cars, they could see news photographers arriving on the scene. Their viral video dream was coming true, but not in the way they had imagined. Instead of becoming internet celebrities, they were about to become examples of what happens when tourists disrespect one of Britain's most sacred institutions. The guard they had tied up resumed his post, standing as still and proud as ever. There was no sign of the ordeal he had just endured, save for the cut zip ties lying on the ground nearby. The sergeant addressed the crowd before dismissing his squad. "Let this be a lesson to all visitors. The Queen's Guard are not here for your entertainment. They are soldiers of the British Army, and they will be respected as such." As the police cars pulled away from Buckingham Palace, Jake, Mike, and Chris sat in stunned silence. Their dream vacation had turned into a nightmare in less than 15 minutes. None of them spoke, each lost in thoughts of what their parents would say, what this meant for their futures, and how a simple prank had gone so horribly wrong. The morning sun continued to shine over London, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded beneath it. The Queen's Guard resumed their duties, the crowd dispersed, but the story of three foolish American tourists was just beginning to spread across social media, though not in the way they had planned. The holding cell at London's Charing Cross police station was cold and uninviting. Jake, Mike, and Chris sat on hard metal benches, their tourist clothes now wrinkled and their faces pale with worry. The reality of their situation was finally setting in, hours after their foolish prank at Buckingham Palace. "My dad's going to kill me," Jake muttered, running his hands through his hair for the 100th time. He was the one who had brought the zip ties, a fact that the police had noted with particular interest during their initial questioning. Outside their cell, they could hear phones ringing constantly. News of their stunt had spread rapidly across social media and news outlets. A police officer walked past their cell, giving them a stern look as he carried a stack of newspapers. On the visible front page, they caught a glimpse of their own faces, captured by security cameras during their prank. Mike, who had been quiet since their arrest, suddenly spoke up. Did you guys notice how quickly they responded? It was like they knew exactly what was happening. A detective named Williams, who had been handling their case, overheard Mike's comment as he approached the cell. He unlocked the door and entered, carrying a thick folder. That's exactly what I'm here to discuss, Detective Williams said, pulling up a chair. Let me explain exactly what you triggered this morning. The three Americans leaned forward, eager to understand the magnitude of their actions. That guard you assaulted? Williams began, opening his folder. He was wearing a state-of-the-art communication device. The moment his movement was restricted, it triggered a silent alarm that went straight to the Queen's Guard Command Center. He showed them a diagram of the security systems around Buckingham Palace. Every guard is connected to a sophisticated network. Their seemingly ceremonial positions are actually part of a complex security operation. Chris's face went white. You mean? Yes, Williams continued. The moment you restricted his movement, you activated a security protocol. The guard's vital signs, position, and situation were immediately transmitted to his commanding officers. The response team was mobilized within 30 seconds. The detective pulled out several photographs taken from security cameras. They showed the three friends approaching the guard, but also revealed multiple angles they hadn't noticed. Cameras hidden in buildings, trees, and even street lamps. While you were laughing and taking selfies, facial recognition software had already identified all three of you. Your passport information was pulled from immigration records before the response team even arrived. Jake felt sick to his stomach. What they had thought was a simple prank had actually triggered an international security response. But why did they send so many guards? Mike asked, his voice barely a whisper. Detective Williams raised an eyebrow. Any interference with a Queen's Guard is treated as a potential terrorist threat until proven otherwise. You're lucky they quickly determined you were just foolish tourists. The response could have been much more severe. He showed them another document, a transcript of the radio communications from that morning. The speed and efficiency of the response was evident in the timestamps. From the moment the alarm was triggered to the squad's arrival had taken exactly 4 minutes and 38 seconds. The guard you tied up? Williams continued. He's a decorated soldier with 4 years of active service. He followed his training perfectly, maintaining his position while allowing the response team to assess the threat level. The three friends sat in stunned silence as the detective continued explaining the sophisticated security system they had unwittingly challenged. Their phones, which had been confiscated, had already been analyzed by cybersecurity experts looking for any potential connections to organized threats. Your stunt cost the taxpayers approximately £25,000 in emergency response resources, Williams concluded. And that's just the beginning of your problems. He stood up, gathering his papers. The American embassy has been notified. Your families have been contacted. And in about an hour, you'll be formally charged. As Detective Williams left the cell, the three friends looked at each other in despair. Their simple dream of creating a viral video had turned into an international incident that had triggered anti-terrorist protocols at one of the most secure locations in Britain. Outside their cell, the phone kept ringing as more news agencies called for details about the American tourists who had learned the hard way that the Queen's Guard was far more than just a tourist attraction. Their story was spreading across the globe, but instead of bringing them fame, it was bringing them notoriety and serious legal consequences. The next morning, the front page of the Times showed a striking photo. 3 American tourists in prison jumpsuits being led into Westminster Magistrates Court. Jake, Mike, and Chris kept their heads down as photographers shouted questions and cameras flashed around them. Inside the courtroom, the magnitude of their situation became even clearer. The prosecution team included not only Crown lawyers but also military representatives. The public gallery was packed with journalists and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the fate of the tourists who had dared to interfere with the Queen's Guard. TC stood to address the court. Your Honor, what we have here is not merely a childish prank. These 3 individuals deliberately assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, compromised the security of a royal installation, and showed complete disregard for both military protocol and British law. The evidence presentation began with high-definition security footage showing multiple angles of the incident. The 3 Americans winced as they watched their drunken selves laughing while restraining the guard. The footage continued, showing the rapid response of the Queen's Guard unit and their subsequent arrest. The guard in question, Private First Class William Davies, is present in court today, Mr. Bennett announced. The young guard, now in his formal military dress uniform, stood up from his seat. Without his ceremonial bearskin hat, he looked even younger, making the Americans feel even more ashamed. Private Davies took the witness stand. His testimony was precise and professional, describing how he maintained his composure despite the assault. As per our training, I activated the silent alarm and waited for the response team. My primary concern was assessing whether this was an isolated incident or part of a larger security threat. The court listened intently as Davies explained the psychological training guards undergo to maintain their famous stoicism. We face hundreds of tourists trying to provoke reactions every day, but physical assault crosses a line that cannot be tolerated. The defense attorney, provided by the American Embassy, did his best to argue for leniency. Your Honor, my clients are young, first-time offenders who made a terrible decision under the influence of alcohol. They have shown genuine remorse and understand the severity of their actions. Jake was called to testify first. His voice shook as he addressed the court. We had no idea about the security implications. We thought the guards were just there for tradition. I know now how wrong we were, and I'm truly sorry. Mike and Chris offered similar apologies, but Judge Henderson's expression remained stern. The prosecution then presented evidence of the costs incurred, the security response, the international diplomatic involvement, and the damage to military dignity. A representative from the American Embassy testified next, making it clear that while they would ensure the defendants' rights were protected, they did not condone their actions. This incident has caused embarrassment to both our nations, the embassy official stated. During a brief recess, the three friends huddled with their lawyer. How bad is it going to be? Chris whispered. Be prepared for serious consequences, their lawyer warned. The judge needs to send a message that will deter others from similar behavior. When the court reconvened, Judge Henderson delivered her verdict. Her voice filled the silent courtroom as she addressed the defendants directly. Your actions demonstrate an appalling lack of respect for both military personnel and British institutions. While I accept that you did not intend to cause a security alert, ignorance is no excuse. The Queen's Guard are not tourist attractions. They are highly trained soldiers performing a vital security role. She paused, looking at each defendant in turn. However, considering your youth, your clean records, and your evident remorse, I am prepared to show some leniency. The three Americans held their breath as she announced their sentences. They would avoid jail time but faced hefty fines, suspended sentences, and a 5-year ban from entering the United Kingdom. Additionally, they would be required to pay compensation for the security response costs. As they left the courtroom, they faced another barrage of cameras and reporters. Their story had become international news, a cautionary tale for tourists everywhere. What had started as a foolish attempt to create a viral video had instead created a viral lesson about respecting foreign institutions and military personnel. That evening, as they prepared to return to America, they watched their story being played on BBC News. The anchor's words summed up their experience perfectly. A reminder to all visitors, the Queen's Guard may look ceremonial, but they are soldiers first, and they will be respected as such. Back in Ohio, the three friends faced a different kind of punishment, the disappointment and anger of their families. Jake sat in his parents' living room, watching his father pace back and forth while holding a stack of papers from their lawyer. Do you understand that this will follow you for the rest of your life? Mr. Thompson asked, his voice tight with frustration. Every job application, every background check, this will show up. The local newspaper had already run several stories about the incident. The small town of Worthington, Ohio, was buzzing with gossip about the three graduates who had embarrassed their community on an international scale. Mike's situation was even worse. His father, a retired military officer, hadn't spoken to him since his return. At dinner, the silence was deafening as his mother tried unsuccessfully to start conversations. The military community had taken particular offense to their actions, and several veterans had written angry letters to the local paper. Chris, whose dream had been to work in international business, watched his job offers disappear one by one. The viral videos and news stories had made sure that any potential employer who searched their names would immediately find the incident. One morning, all three received emails from their university. The school's disciplinary board had decided to review their recently awarded degrees in light of the incident. The board was concerned about how their actions reflected on the university's reputation. "We need to do something," Chris said during a video call with his friends. They'd all looked terrible, tired, stressed, and aged beyond their years. "We can't just let this define us forever." They decided to write a formal apology letter to Private Davies and the Queen's Guard. It took them days to craft the right words, trying to express their genuine remorse and understanding of the seriousness of their actions. Meanwhile, their story had taken on a life of its own. News channels used it as a cautionary tale about respectful tourism. Travel websites updated their London guides with specific warnings about appropriate behavior around the Queen's Guard. Social media had turned them into a meme, with their photos being shared alongside captions about terrible tourist behavior. The financial impact was crushing. Between the court-ordered fines, legal fees, and cancelled return flights, each of them had accumulated significant debt. Their parents had refused to help, believing they needed to face the consequences of their actions. Jake had to sell his car to pay his portion of the fines. Mike, who had planned to start graduate school in the fall, had to defer his admission and take a job at a local warehouse instead. Chris watched his savings account dwindle to nothing as the bills kept coming. One day, they received unexpected responses to their apology letters. Private Davies had written back, his words firm, but not unkind. "Your actions that day tested my training and professionalism. I hope you understand now that we are not merely tourist attractions, but soldiers dedicated to our duty. I accept your apology and trust you have learned from this experience." The commanding officer of the Queen's Guard also responded, acknowledging their remorse, but emphasizing the seriousness of their actions. "Your case has become required reading for all tourist-facing military personnel. While regrettable, your story now serves a purpose in preventing similar incidents." 6 months after the incident, they were invited to speak at their old high school about actions and consequences. Standing before the students, they shared their story as a warning about how quickly poor decisions can derail lives. "We thought we were just making a funny video," Jake told the silent auditorium. "Instead, we assaulted a soldier, triggered an international incident, and ruined our immediate futures. All for what? A few likes on social media." The assembly had a profound effect on both the students and the three friends. For the first time, they felt they were turning their mistake into something positive, a lesson for others. As they left the school that day, Mike summed up their experience. "You know what the worst part is? We were so focused on trying to make that guard break character that we ended up breaking our own characters instead. We're not really the people who would do something like that, but now that's how the world sees us." They knew their story would follow them for years to come, appearing in tourist guides and military training materials as an example of what not to do. Their prank had lasted only minutes, but its consequences would shape the rest of their lives. The story of the 3 American tourists and the Queen's Guard had evolved into something much bigger than a simple prank gone wrong. 1 month after the incident, diplomatic tensions between the United States and United Kingdom reached an unexpected peak over the matter. British tabloids had seized on the story, running daily articles with headlines like "American hooligans mock British tradition" and "U.S. tourists threaten royal security." The coverage sparked outrage among British citizens, who flooded social media with demands for stricter punishments for disrespectful tourists. While condemning the 3 students' actions, some outlets questioned whether the response had been too harsh. Morning shows debated the severity of the punishment, with guests arguing both sides of the issue. Sarah Thompson, Jake's mother, appeared on Good Morning America to discuss the impact on her son. "They made a terrible mistake," she admitted, wiping tears from her eyes. "But these are good boys who did one stupid thing. Should that really destroy their entire futures?" The interview went viral in Britain, causing even more controversy. The British public viewed it as an attempt to downplay the seriousness of the offense. Veterans groups organized protests outside the American embassy in London, demanding stronger consequences for disrespecting military personnel. Private Davies, the guard who had been tied up, found himself unwillingly thrust into the spotlight. Military magazines wanted his story, and television shows competed for his first interview. The palace, however, maintained strict control over his public appearances, allowing him to release only a brief statement. "I stand by my duty to the Crown and trust that justice has been served. Let this incident serve as a reminder that the Queen's Guard are active military personnel deserving of respect." The diplomatic tension reached its peak when a British tourism minister suggested implementing special screening procedures for American tourists at royal sites. The U.S. State Department immediately responded, calling such measures discriminatory and unnecessary. In London, the American ambassador had to navigate carefully between supporting her citizens and maintaining good relations with the host country. During a press conference at the embassy, she stated, "While we understand the anger this incident has caused, we must ensure that the actions of three individuals do not damage the strong friendship between our nations." The situation became even more complicated when surveillance footage from the incident was leaked online. The high-definition video showed every detail of the prank, including close-ups of the guard's face as he maintained his composure. The footage went viral globally, sparking new waves of outrage and debate. International tourism organizations began using the incident in their educational materials. Major travel websites added prominent warnings about respecting local customs and military personnel. Tour guides in London incorporated the story into their presentations, pointing out the spot where it had happened as a reminder of what not to do. The three friends watched helplessly as their story continued to spiral beyond their control. Their names had become synonymous with disrespectful tourism. History teachers used their case to discuss modern diplomatic relations. Law students analyzed their trial as an example of international legal consequences. Jake, Mike, and Chris received hundreds of messages daily, some expressing sympathy, others condemning their actions. Their social media accounts were flooded with comments in multiple languages, forcing them to disable their profiles. Their parents organized a joint press conference, hoping to end the ongoing media circus. Standing together outside their local courthouse, they read a prepared statement. "Our sons have accepted responsibility for their actions and face the consequences. We now ask for privacy as they work to rebuild their lives and learn from this experience." The statement helped calm some of the media frenzy, but the diplomatic discussions continued. Both governments eventually agreed to use the incident as a catalyst for positive change, establishing a joint committee to develop guidelines for tourist behavior at military and royal sites worldwide. As summer turned to fall, the international attention gradually began to fade, but the impact of their actions had left an indelible mark on British-American relations and tourist protocols around the world. What had started as a foolish prank had become a cautionary tale about respect, responsibility, and international relations in the age of social media. In the end, their story would be remembered not just as a moment of youthful stupidity, but as an incident that changed how the world viewed the intersection of tourism, military tradition, and national respect. 5 years had passed since the infamous Queen's Guard incident. On a crisp autumn morning, Jake Thompson stood in front of a college classroom at Ohio State University, where he had once been a student himself. Now, he was a guest speaker for an international relations course, sharing his experience and its long-lasting consequences. "Before I tell you how this changed my life," Jake began, addressing the attentive students, "let me show you something." Mike Sullivan had found his calling in an unexpected place. After years of community service speaking at schools about responsible tourism, he now worked for a major travel company, developing cultural sensitivity training programs for young travelers. His personal experience had become a powerful teaching tool. Chris Reynolds, who had initially feared his international business dreams were ruined, had managed to turn the situation around. He now ran a successful consulting firm that helped universities prepare students for overseas travel and cultural exchanges. His company's slogan, "Learn from our mistakes, not your own," was a direct reference to their infamous incident. The three friends had become unlikely advocates for responsible tourism. Their story was now included in travel guidebooks worldwide, and their cautionary tale was part of standard training for tour guides in multiple countries. Airlines even included their case study in pre-landing videos for flights to the United Kingdom. Private Davies, the guard they had tied up, had risen through the ranks to become a training officer. He used their story to teach new recruits about maintaining composure under pressure. The security protocols triggered that day had been refined and implemented at royal sites throughout the Commonwealth. During a rare joint interview on the 5th anniversary of the incident, the three friends reflected on how their lives had changed. "We lost a lot, Mike admitted, but we also gained perspective. Every mistake, no matter how terrible, can become a lesson for others. The incident had sparked lasting changes in tourism policies worldwide. Military ceremonies and guards at historical sites now had clearer boundaries and stricter enforcement. Tourist behavior around military personnel had improved significantly, with reported incidents dropping by 70% globally. Their court-mandated 5-year ban from entering the United Kingdom was finally ending. The three friends had received an unexpected invitation from the British Embassy in Washington, a chance to return to London and participate in a documentary about the changes their actions had inspired. It's ironic. Chris told the documentary crew, "We wanted to go viral for all the wrong reasons. Instead, we went viral as an example of what not to do, and somehow that made a bigger impact than we could have imagined." The Queen's Guard had incorporated their story into their official training manual. New guards learned about the incident as an example of maintaining discipline under unusual circumstances. The response protocols developed that day had become standard procedure at ceremonial posts worldwide. Tourist materials at Buckingham Palace now included clear warnings about respecting the guards, with a QR code linking to their story. Gift shops sold postcards showing proper tourist behavior, and tour guides had specific training on managing visitor interactions with the guards. Social media had evolved too. Their viral video had sparked discussions about responsible tourism content creation. Major platforms now had specific guidelines about posting content involving military personnel or ceremonial guards, with their incidents cited in the policy documentation. The three friends continued their speaking engagements, sharing their story with new audiences. Schools invited them to talk about consequences. Universities included their case in ethics courses. Tourism conferences featured them as keynote speakers on cultural sensitivity. The hardest lesson, Jake concluded in his classroom presentation, was realizing that 5 minutes of foolishness could impact not just our lives, but international relations and tourism policies worldwide. We became an unwanted example, but at least we made it count for something positive. As they ended their joint interview, a journalist asked if they had any regrets beyond the obvious ones. Mike smiled sadly and replied, "Our biggest regret is that we had to learn respect the hard way. But if our story prevents even one person from making the same mistake, then maybe some good came from it after all." Their story had become more than just a cautionary tale. It was now a permanent part of how the world viewed the intersection of tourism, respect, and tradition. The three friends who had once sought internet fame had found something more meaningful, a way to turn their biggest mistake into a lasting lesson for future generations.